Have, have fun.
Hey guys, this is Keegan with Michael Landsberg. We are doing my show Dimitrovic Diner, even though I don't classify myself as an interviewer. Today, we're going to go into a different topic. We're going to talk about pro wrestling. Michael Landsberg is arguably known as the top interviewer, no pun intended, to anything with professional wrestlers, whether it's NHL, MMA, pro hockey, wrestling, anything. So we're going to talk about wrestlers because back in the late 90s and early 2000s, Michael Landsberg interviewed all the top stars from both the WWF, now known as World Wrestling Entertainment, and WCW. So Michael probably has a lot of great stories, but first I got to ask you, Mike, how you doing?
Well, I've been sitting here rehearsing how to say your name, Dimitrovic. And then I screw it up and I start to lose my confidence. Dimitriovich. Oh no, I blew it again. So other than that, I'm good. Mentally, I feel good today. I've been on a hot streak. I mean, you and I see each other on Twitter all the time, and so I'm good. And looking back at this is fun for me, and push me for the inside stuff, for stuff that, less than, you can ask me for my opinion about different interviews I did. You can ask me anything you want. Absolutely. But if I'm half the interviewer that you suggested I was, I would be making sure that I tried to get things that other people wouldn't know or wouldn't necessarily get. So with that preface, I'm good to go.
Awesome. So the one thing I told myself before I started this, because I have watched all of your wrestling interviews and they've all been fantastic in their own ways. So I rewatched them all again over the last couple of weeks, and I was trying to pick up stuff that maybe you've never been asked before or haven't been asked a million times already. Because if I ask the same thing that's already been answered a million times, it's just kind of, it's kind of defeating the purpose of this, right? So I went through all your interviews all the way from the late 90s with Vince McMahon all the way up till recently. And just to get a feel for how you feel for each performer, I wanted to do a little bit of term association just at the beginning, just to see exactly who we're dealing with here. And I got to go with number one, Bret Hart.
Not what you think. I was shocked when I first met him that he was very quiet, he's introverted, right? He seemed like he leaned to the shy side, and he's a guy who when he grabs a microphone in the wrestling setting, he totally changes. He becomes someone totally different, which is really cool if you think about it. I mean, it's just not his natural way to be. I mean, nobody talks in real life the way they talk, cutting a wrestling promo, obviously. I mean, that would be kind of like horrible for someone to walk around and say, "I'll see you for lunch tomorrow." I mean, that would be
Austin.
Yeah, exactly. But I just thought Bret was a very interesting, a very complicated, and a very thoughtful guy. I don't mean that he gave me gifts thoughtful. I mean, he thinks about things before he says them.
Absolutely. And, Bret's obviously one guy that I feel like down the road I have to meet, because if you're a Canadian and you are a pro wrestling fan or even a sports fan, I think you should at least try to go meet Bret Hart, because he represents everything that our country's about in the best of ways. So with Bret too, I wanted to ask in relation with him, the Montreal screw job. I don't want to go through the entire thing because it's already been gone through a million times, but I want to know, from your opinion as a Canadian, what were your thoughts when that incident happened in Montreal where Vince screwed Bret for the WWE title, and he can justify it in any way he wants? Bret was screwed. And I want to know, as a fan and as a Canadian, what was your take on that instance at Survivor Series when Vince rang the bell and sent Bret to WCW empty-handed?
Well, I mean, selfishly, from our standpoint, it really put us on the map, right? Because that was going down. TSN and wrestling were synonymous with each other. On Tuesdays, was it Tuesdays? We would come out of Raw. I think it was Tuesdays. And our ratings would be enormous if we had a wrestler on the show. So the fact that Bret said, I want to come on and tell my story. I mean, that's great to start with. And then Vince heard him telling his story and said, I want to tell my story. I mean, this is like the dream. You know, when people come to you and say, I want to use you as a platform, that's amazing when they're, famous and interesting and people that draw attention. So that was my first thing. This is gold. The second thing was that, yeah, he got screwed for sure. But there's always been a part of me that says, that's kind of the nature of what you do, meaning that stuff happens. It's not like you had the Super Bowl taken away from you, which you won, not based on anyone's script or decision to let you win it. So I do think he got screwed for sure. But in the world of wrestling, given all of what we could talk about, how it does have a scripted feel to it, right? I mean, Vince decides who's going to be champion, and the only thing that he screwed him on was the fact that he didn't tell him that he was going to take the belt away. So yeah, I thought it was a shitty thing for Vince to do, but I also I think that it's not the worst thing a human being could do who owned a wrestling promotion.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, a lot of promoters have done a lot worse than that. And two,
Vince has done a lot worse than that.
Yes, I can see it from both perspectives, with Vince not trusting Eric and wanting to really protect the WWF belt, which was the most prestigious belt at that time and still is. But at the same time, you can understand it from Bret's perspective, who had 30 days of reasonable creative control, and his issues with Shawn, which led to a whole other thing, which leads me actually to my next guy, and that's Shawn Michaels. What was it like interviewing him, and what was it like in 2003 when you interviewed him and he was born again? Did you see a difference, or was it so glimpses?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think, and Shawn Michaels wasn't nearly as memorable for me as Bret was, because Bret was on the show 15 times. Yeah. Bret had dinner at my house. I went to a Maple Leaf game with Bret Hart. So I mean, I know him more intimately than anyone else involved in wrestling. But Shawn Michaels, I mean, there was always this, I always got this feel, even though, he's a brilliant wrestler, right? Brilliant. I always got the feel that he was a little bit greasy. When he started Born Again talk, which I'm not here to criticize Born Again talk, but I didn't necessarily believe that he believed all of it. So, but I mean, it's a very challenging thing to do when you're interviewing someone. The topic of religion is typically one that you can't really win on, because I mean, I'm Jewish, not relevant, but I'm Jewish, but I don't observe many of the laws. I'm not sure that I believe in God, but that's my choice, right? I'm not a fan at all of people talking about their own belief and their own God and how people should live their lives and how people should accept Jesus, for instance. Like I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying, don't tell me to do that. And you better, if you're going to preach about, following God's rules, whatever religion, and preach about it and talk about it and push people, then you better live a 100% pure life. Otherwise, you're a hypocrite. So I find people less interesting when their fallback position is to talk about religion.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And like when I observed the interview that you did with him, I think it was like a week or two after you did the Bret interview in 2003 post-stroke, and Bret looked fantastic too. He called Shawn a two-faced lying chicken shit. That was the exact quote. And you showed that to Shawn. That's great publicity too, if you're interviewing somebody, because then you get Shawn's reaction. Whether his reaction was genuine or not, I don't know. But I think Shawn, deep down, whether he says it now or not, I think he regrets that the screw job did happen. And I think there was a time that he didn't, there was a time, but I think now, well, I mean, him and Bret have made up now, in the last few years, but I think Shawn deep down probably wishes that didn't happen, because that really put a taint on his reputation as well. And I think 2 months after that is when he broke his back against Taker in the casket match at the Rumble. So a lot happened after that for him too. And I think in some ways you have seen changes, and in other ways too, like you said, with religion, it's such a touchy subject that you don't know exactly how to respond to that when someone says, God put me here and God did this for me, God did this for me. And that's not excusing what he believes in, because if that works for him, then that's fantastic and he's living a great life. But at the same time, not all of us are going to understand that
Yeah.
point of view, right? And that philosophy and that ideology. So that also brings me to my next guy, and that's Eric Bischoff, who you also interviewed right near this. And you actually asked me one time what my thoughts on Eric Bischoff were. And I tried to give you the best answer I could, but I've never met Eric. I've only seen what he's done on interviews and on TV. But you guys talked quite a bit. You interviewed him, I believe, in early 1998, and then again in 2002. Was there any real tension between you guys, or was he just working everybody?
No, I think there was. I think it's Eric Bischoff is a super bright guy.
Yes.
And super able to pull off any act he wants to pull off. So if it's going to be a work that he dislikes me, he's going to sell it so well that I'm not going to know that it's a work.
Yeah.
But if you had to ask me, I would say that it was 60% genuine, that he thought I was a big talking, loudmouth guy who wasn't in the game. He was just talking about the game.
Yeah.
And I think that he came in without a doubt saying, okay, well, I'm going to take Landsberg down, right? I'm going to show him that, he can't push me around in an interview, which is true, right? I mean, it's Eric Bischoff. I mean, I'm a huge fan of his, but I think he genuinely, at that point in his life, especially when we first talked to him, he had the swagger of, hey, I'm WCW and we are, we're kicking their ass. And I think we made a bet, if I remember correctly, something about like, if Raw beats WCW in the Monday Night Wars, he would do something. I don't remember what it was. Do you remember?
I actually don't remember what the bet was, but I do remember him on that 98 interview talking about Steve, saying that if Steve was in WCW, Steve wouldn't have been as big of a star with guys like Hogan and Nash. And although I respect Eric and everything he's done, I think if you sent Austin to Nitro in 98, that would have been the biggest talk of the business for the entire decade, because Austin was so red hot at that time that's back when Hogan was like ice cold in 1998. He was kind of, I don't want to say past his prime, but he was past the glory days of the gimmick. The heel turn had already kind of ran its course. They already did the program with Sting at Starrcade. So I think if you sent Austin to Nitro in 98, that whole tide could have turned. So that's where I disagreed with him on that. But Brett also had shared a lot of thoughts on Eric too, who he said he liked as a person, but creatively, he thought Eric didn't know what to do with him in WCW.
Yeah. I mean, how many people actually know what to do with a Bret Hart? I mean, it's not as simple as, I mean, even a guy like you who, follows it, you're a smart guy, you're a creative guy, you might think in your head, and I'm not saying that you couldn't, but you might think to yourself, and I was going to try to say your last name, but I just I became overcome with fear. You may say to yourself, I could run a wrestling promotion with big names and I would know what to do with them, which may be the case. But very often we delude ourselves to thinking that we can do something that somebody does at the highest level, or that I wouldn't make those mistakes or anything like that. So I don't know whether Eric Bischoff knew what to do with Bret Hart. Sometimes we think that our boss should be doing something with us.
It's all in hindsight. Yeah.
Yeah. But also, like ego comes into it, and it's like, okay, well, I should be the number one star. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. And sometimes we don't see ourselves the way the rest of the world sees ourselves. Right.
Exactly.
So it's a really complicated business with so many egos to try to feed. And in the end, I guess the best thing about WCW was, for Bret, was money.
Yep, $3 million a year for 3 years. And speaking, you said something about ego, so I want to touch on ego, because you have interviewed a lot of guys with massive egos, whether positive or negative. So I want to know, and I got to ask you, who was the most difficult guy to interview? Not just based off of like negative interactions, but just to connect with, or just
that's a good way to phrase it, because I need to preface it by saying, if a guy comes in and he hates me and he wants to fight with me, not physically, but if he wants to debate, if he thinks that, I've wronged him in some interview that I did before that, that's gold. I mean, that kind of argument is gold, especially when it's legit. right? I love that. That's the dream. So people say, what's the worst show you ever did or worst guest? And I'll say, then they'll say like Chael Sonnen. And I'll go, no, are you kidding? You know, like when you do TV, it's not about finding friends. It's about doing something that's engaging. So, so guys that came in and, you know, thinking like Bischoff the first time, you know, I'm going to show this guy. I mean, that's great TV. I would say that, that Chris Benoit was a difficult guy, even though I went back and watched the I guess the second Benoit show, that I thought he was great. I mean, Chris was a very unusual man. I mean, you could tell that not that he had issues, but you could tell that he didn't see the world necessarily the way many of us see the world. I mean, he kept calling me Mr. Landsberg and sir. And I kept saying, Chris, you know, like, what are you doing, man? It's not like I'm even that much older than you. Like, he says, well, you deserve my respect. I go, yeah, but you know, you don't have to show respect by calling me Mr. Call me by my name and you show me respect coming to do the show. So he was a tough guy to crack. I always felt like there was a wall between us that would never be taken down. And obviously we know the tragic circumstances of his story. And in that interview, because I watched it recently, he talked about Eddie Guerrero. He talked about how wrestling was not responsible for Eddie Guerrero's addiction problems and concussions. And it was kind of haunting to watch that, knowing that a couple of years later, Chris Benoit, you know, was going to be 1,000 times worse than Eddie ever was. So I found him to be really, really, really challenging for sure. I'm trying to think, I mean, it's hard for me to remember all of the names. Just let's play name association again. Do you have a list of all the people I talked to?
Yeah, I got a whole bunch. And two, I wanted to touch quickly too on the Benoit thing. Like when you interviewed him, that because I know you interviewed him, I believe in, I want to say 1999, I think was the first one. And then you again in 04, right after WrestleMania 20. And you talked about his ascension to main eventing WrestleMania 20, arguably having the greatest Mania main event match of all time with Hunter and Shawn in the triple threat, which was incredible. But like you said, you went back and looked at that interview, and you said also in the last interview that we did that he had a very unusual outlook. So one quote that I took away from your interview with him is you told him that the world of wrestling can push a lot of people into the depths of darkness. And he said, I disagree. I believe that that you push yourself into the depths of darkness. And then we look at what happened a couple years later and we go, man, like, I don't know if I could have interviewed him and then watched that back and been like, man, I don't know what happened that day. So major props to you for even going back to rewatch that, because I don't even know if I could have personally.
He was, I mean, the story is too horrible, even like it's just like you say. I mean, those are the things you want to avoid thinking about, right? That's a ruin your day, you know, kind of thought where you go back and you think, and you know, knowing that I knew someone and knowing that he knew me. I mean, I know lots of people that don't know me from the standpoint that they're famous and I know them, just like you, who did you mention before? You said you'd really like to interview Bret Hart. You feel like you know Bret Hart, but Bret Hart doesn't know you.
No, he had no idea who I am.
No, of course not. So my point is that, you know, with me, there's a lot of people like that too, but Chris Benoit is a guy that, you know, we talked before and after, and, you know, you couldn't help but like him, but there was always something where you thought, I kind of feel bad for him. And I'm not 100% sure why.
I think it was a mental illness thing before the mental illness thing really became a thing. That's what I truly believe. And I know we touched about it on the last interview, but I think if he was in this era and you brought him back in and with this whole mental health stuff, there could have been a way to maybe get him to open up, because I noticed too, like, he wasn't rude. He was actually very polite, but you could tell he was hiding something, you know, like you could tell he was keeping something in and didn't really want to open the door fully. Whereas I think if that was today, it might've been a bit different. So like if I would have been, I was 3 years old when you interviewed him, but if I was his age, like whatever he was, like 37, 38 at that time, I might have been the same as him, where I wouldn't have wanted to open up, because back then in WWE, you would have lost your spot if you were weak, or you were, you know, or if you were sick, not weak. Like he broke his neck 2 years before that and he was out for a year, and I'm sure he was scared that he was going to lose his spot.
Oh yeah. He was, honestly, Of all the guys I ever met, he was one of the people that I thought he'll never be able to give this up. Wrestling, like wrestling was in his blood in a way that wasn't just a way to make a living. It defined who he was. And that, I mean, that's trouble for everyone in life. When you have this one massive thing in your life, it's a real challenge to move on to something else. But Chris Benoit was soft-spoken, very soft-spoken. He had me like leaning forward, like, what'd you say? And obviously,
it's sad what happened, and I feel horrible about it, and nothing can ever excuse what happened in June of that year in 07. But at the same time too, I think it's also a good precedent to show that you can't always keep everything in. You gotta, like, there's got to be times you have to know when to unveil stuff and know when to speak. And I think that we could use that, try to make it a positive thing where, like, hey, if you're famous and you're well known and you're struggling, don't keep it in, because I know it's easier said than done, but if you know that you're walking the edge, you have to do absolutely everything you can to better yourself. So I wanted to put that out.
But just think of this. Just think of this. If Chris Benoit would have said to himself, given the fact that he really, I think, defined himself. I'm not a Chris Benoit expert, but it seemed to me like he was a guy who was never going to leave wrestling. So here you have a guy who just everything about his life is wrestling. And he says to himself, you know, I'm not well. I have these thoughts. I have suicidal thoughts. I have depression, which means that most of the time I'm acting, you know, all of the things that go with that. As you just said, if he goes to Vince and says, you know, I need 6 months off or whatever for my mental health, as you said, he's going to pay a huge price in the WWE at that point.
The stock would have went down.
Yeah. So now he's torn, right? He's saying, okay, well, I need to get help. I want to get help, but that would destroy my professional career. So what does he do? He keeps it inside. And then he gets to the point. Yeah. And then he gets to the point where he no longer has control over his own decision making. So it's all bad.
Yeah, I mean, exactly too. And you nailed it on the head. And it's, again, it's a mental health thing. Like, I see people on Twitter, they'll call him a piece of shit and they'll say, oh, you know, I'm not going to say the F bomb right on here, but F him, screw him, you know, and I get that to an extent, but at the same time too, it's also by circumstance. It doesn't excuse his actions, but he was in a bad position, you know, and his son too even talked about it on his interview with Chris Van Vliet, who's also a fellow Canadian, and his son's getting in the ring. David Benoit, his son from Edmonton. So I hope the best for him too. So if he's watching, you're a fellow Canadian, and I hope you do really well in the ring.
Yeah.
But on to the next people. So we actually just said something about Vince. So I want to know, term association with Vince, how was it to put him on the hot seat more times than one and stump him? Because a lot of people can't stump Vince, and you did it.
Well, the first Vince interview, which was, I guess, in the fall of the screw job, right? I don't remember the date. Well, it'd be weird if I remembered the date. It's a long time ago now, but I remember him in the makeup room, and he was getting makeup, and I stood behind him and I was talking to him. And then I said something sort of, I don't remember what it was, but classically Landsberg, meaning, you know, it was kind of, it was a smart ass remark. And it was a jab for sure. And he kind of gave me like a kind of a smirk or whatever. And I mean, he would never remember any of this because it wasn't significant to his life, but it was significant to mine. And I thought, okay, that's a really good thing for my confidence, because I don't know if I told you this last time, but the toughest thing about doing a general interview show like Off the Record is that you have to interview people basically about their lives. Yeah. You have to act like you know as much about their lives as they do, meaning, you know, he says something, and if I'm going to challenge him, I have to have the confidence that I'm challenging Vince McMahon on something in the wrestling world when I've had a day to prepare for it, because the next day I got another show and then another show. So the fact that I was able to, in the makeup room, just be myself, and say something to Vince, said, wow, Michael, you're not intimidated. And intimidation is not something that we can necessarily program for ourselves, right? You can't choose when you're nervous and when you're not. It's kind of like it chooses us. So that was a reminder that, hey, Michael, you can do this with Vince McMahon, and you can challenge him, and it's going to be really good. And then we went on the air, and if I remember correctly, I said to him something about, so you screwed Brett? And he said, I didn't screw Brett. And I said to him, but you had agreed beforehand, right? It would be a draw. And he said, yes. And I said, so when you told the ref to ring the bell, that was not what you agreed upon, right? He goes, yeah, that's true. I go, so you screwed Brett, right?
And he wouldn't admit it. Too much pride to admit it. Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I'm look at me.
You're jabbing with him. Yeah.
So that changed. I think that changed a lot of my career, because I developed confidence that I could spar with people in their worlds, right? You're talking to a hockey player and you're challenging that hockey player on decisions he made, or his team and the way they played, and things that are his world, his life. And you need to believe that you're not going to say something like Dana White. He and I had this relationship where I was trying to go gotcha, and he was trying to go gotcha. And one time he actually said, whoa, I got you, man. And it was like, okay. But that's a challenge that I guess of all the things that I did professionally, that was the thing I enjoyed the most, was the challenge to debate someone about something that they know 1,000 times more about than you.
That was the 2004 interview. I think that was I think in June of 2004. That was a really good interview. That was a long interview, and you kept up with Vince the entire time, and you put him on that hot seat quite a few times where he didn't know how to answer. But speaking of guys that really know how to talk and can jab, Paul Heyman's another guy that you interviewed, and Heyman's known as one of the greatest talkers in the history of the business. How'd it feel jabbing with him?
It's a different interview with him, right? Because he obviously is not a wrestler. He is a wrestling mind, and according to people like you who know him way better than I know, he's a really smart guy who knows what to do with people, so to speak. So I look forward to that challenge. I don't remember it well, to be honest with you, because I only talked to him once, but I look forward to the challenge of doing something different than interviewing a wrestler, which you have so many fallbacks with that wrestler, right? And you can talk about anything with them. But Paul Heyman was more challenging, I think. I don't even remember if it came out well or not. I don't remember.
I mean this as a compliment to him. He is the one performer in the industry that knows how to dance around and answer a question without really answering it. He's perfect at that. He's like Eric Bischoff, where you don't know whether it's a work or a shoot, and he could dance around that question to make you believe it, even though he's not really answering it. So that's major props to him. But also to the next person I wanted to ask you about was Hulk Hogan, who you interviewed in late 2002. What were your thoughts on him personally, and what were your thoughts on his comments just in general? Like, I know, and he said some stuff about Mick Foley that I thought was pretty derogatory during it, about like Mick Foley, not training or eating M&Ms or something in burgers while he's working out twice a day.
Right.
So I don't know, because Mick is a great talent. Mick's been on your show a million times, and he's a great guy, and I've met him too. So what were your thoughts on Hogan?
My thoughts on Hogan were that when a guest walked in, it was my job, at least the way I saw it, to create a bond with them. Somehow to have them go, okay, this guy respects me, which with wrestlers was always a huge thing, right? That, and that's why we ended up getting all those wrestlers, or one of the reasons, because they knew that they would be treated with respect, that somebody would be prepared for them and ask them questions that challenged them. When Hogan walked in, I didn't crack him at all. Like, I could tell that he was there. We did 2 shows with him. They were the last shows before our Christmas break. And I mean, that's relevant because I went from work to home, and then with my family to the airport, and we were going to Florida, and he was on the same flight. right? And
Yeah.
I saw him in the departure lounge, and I said hi to him, right? And he gave me a look like he didn't know who I was. And yet 2 hours before, he had spent an hour and a half with me asking him everything I could think of to ask him.
Yeah.
So I found him to be standoffish at the time, but then, later on, he had something that he was promoting. So this would have been probably a decade later. And I found him to be a lot more engaging. And we actually, I think we hired him a couple of times to give his opinion about sports, right? We said, I mean, you can't keep asking someone to come back unless you offer them something. Most people, it's publicity, but with him, I think we offered him some money, and he was great. And he was, he'd play along. And I really thought that he was a different guy, which I don't know if he was different or if he saw me differently, but either way, I grew to like him.
Great. Yeah. I've never met Hogan either, but he's somebody too that has made such a big impact on the business. So whether anybody has personal negative thoughts about him or positive thoughts, we can all agree that he definitely did a lot to help the business from a financial and publicity.
Oh yeah.
So that's going to lead me to my next guy, and that I'm a huge fan of his. Kurt Angle. You've interviewed Kurt Angle a few times.
Yes.
He's somebody that I've looked up to as a great inspiration, just because he's had a great story. He could have easily ended up as a tragedy with all his injuries and stuff, but he ended up coming on top of it. And he actually just did a biography for A&E that was absolutely incredible. I think it's probably the best one that the WWE's put together. So you interviewed him, I believe, in 2001, and then you interviewed him again in 2004 right after WrestleMania 20. Well, what was it like interacting with him?
What did you, let me ask you this question. What did you learn from the documentary? Like, what's one thing that kind of stood out or a thought that you walked away with?
That he's a human being, even though he's a physical specimen and a physical machine. He had screw ups, he messed up, but he found a way to achieve redemption and come back in a way that really fully redeemed himself and redeemed, him and his family. So yeah, that's what I took away, is that he said something like, I can screw up and I don't want to be remembered for that fully, but I want to be remembered as the guy who came back and never lost to anything. So,
I don't know where he was in the evolution of Kurt Angle and his screw up and his redemption when I met him the two times. So I'm not sure where he was, but there was a humanity about him that I liked. I felt like I was interviewing 100% Kurt Angle.
He's the nicest wrestler I've ever met, man.
Yeah, not 50%. Like when I hate using the word but when we interviewed The Rock, I thought I was talking 50% to Dwayne Johnson and 50% to Rock. Yeah, well, it was just like he, and that's I love The Rock, right? Like I think he may be the most charming man on the planet, but I never felt like I had. I never felt like he was exposing parts of him that I wanted to expose. But in the case of Kurt Angle, I felt like it was all him. Like this was the guy. And I was meeting every cell of his body, every part of his brain he was offering up. And that's a great thing. And that's humility, right? When you're willing to share your lowest moments, when you're willing to show pain and emotion, especially for men who typically protect themselves from showing that, then I thought it was really cool.
His neck was broken at that time that you interviewed him too. He broke it like the month before against Eddie Guerrero at WrestleMania 20. So he was probably in a lot of pain doing that interview too, and he still went all the way up. I think it was in Toronto. Yeah. He gave you the best he could possibly give you. And that's what I love about Kurt, because even too, like I've had the chance to talk to him on Twitter, and I sent him a message one time, and I was just asking him, about a match with the Undertaker that he had, and about how much he's meant to me, because I met him in 2010. I was 8 years old going on 9, and I struggled with depression even back then. And to meet him for that one day was awesome, because he treated me great. He let me go in the ring after the show. He put his arm over my chest. I still have the picture. I'll probably post it later. He put his arm over my chest. I offered my hand to him at 8 years old, and he shook my hand, and I never forgot that. So the way he treated me is what really made him become my hero. You know,
Yeah.
so
And rightfully so, but that's how you should, if you want to look at someone and hold them at on a pedestal at a certain height, their physical performance, whether it's wrestling or whether it's football, if it's a quarterback, if you love, if you want to put Aaron Rodgers on the pedestal, he should only get to the top rung if he shows you a humanity that you didn't know he had. If you believe he's genuinely a good person, that's what should take him from the 9th rung, which he earns by being, in Aaron Rodgers' case, one of the greatest quarterbacks in history. He gets to be at the top, but he doesn't, or near the top, but he doesn't get to the top unless he shows you what Kurt Angle showed you, which is, this sense of relevance in the world. And he knew that he could impact you by being nice.
Yeah, and it was incredible too. Like that, I still remember that to this day. And he's going to be in Hamilton in September for the Hamilton Comic-Con. So I'm going to make my way up there, 3-hour drive, and I'm going to go see him. It's going to be incredible, and I hope he's doing well. He just got knee replacement, so.
God, I mean, that's what you give up, right? The price for wrestling is, body parts. Body parts don't last as long as they could. Who else is going to be at Comic-Con? Anyone else wrestling?
Devon Dudley from the Dudley Boys. I don't know if Bubba Ray will be there, but I know Devon will, and the New Age Outlaws, Road Dogg and Billy Gunn.
Right, because I would love to show up, and I don't know those other guys, but I know Kurt.
Yeah,
and it would be just fun for me to kind of reminisce with them. It would be less fun if they went, I don't remember you.
He's the nicest wrestler you'll ever meet. I actually asked him about you one time. I texted him. And I said, what were your thoughts on your interviews with Michael Landsberg in 01 and 04? And he said that he really liked it. He said he enjoyed it. And he said that you were very fair with your questions and you were very kind to him, and that's what it was. And good. I've never heard of Kurt Angle being rude to anybody. I mean, I just haven't. But I told him, I said, yeah, I'll be there at the Hamilton Comic-Con. I'm just going to be there as a fan. I'm going to go check out the vendors, and it should be a fun show. It's going to be my first Comic-Con, I think, since before COVID hit. So it's going to be intriguing to see him there. But also too, this interview will expire in about 3 minutes. So my question for you is, do you have time for another 5 to 10 minutes after this?
Yeah.
Interview? Okay.
Yeah. What time is it?
It is 10:30, right on the head.
Okay, let's do it. So you're going to send me a link, and I'm going to click on the link.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Awesome.
Fire away.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Send it 1 sec. All right. Okay, guys, after the break, so we are back now, and we are still going with Wrestler Association with everyone Michael Landsberg's interviewed. But before we get to the names, I have one more question for you. Who is one wrestler from back in the day, whether it's from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, that you wish you interviewed, that you didn't get the chance to ever interview?
Let me think about that. I got to put myself back in that time. I mean, Andre the Giant, I don't know what kind of interview he was, but he was intriguing. Man, there would have been so many things that you wouldn't even have to prepare for that interview in the traditional way, because there would just be questions that came to you about him and his life and all of it. So I'm going to go with him.
Just being in the same room as him would have created publicity. And another guy too that you never interviewed was Brock Lesnar. Even though you had talked about Brock quite a bit, like I remember you had asked Edge about Brock, you had asked Kurt about his matches with Brock, but Brock is one of those guys that does not like to do interviews.
Yeah, I interviewed him. I actually did interview him, but it was years later when he was UFC.
Yeah.
And I interviewed him on his farm, and I felt like, even though it's a satellite interview, so it's very different than face to face, I actually felt like we had a bond, right? And when I say we had a bond, it's not like he's thinking we got to be lifelong friends. It's like there was a connection there, and I think he genuinely wanted to answer my questions because they were thoughtful, and so I think he let down a little bit of the armor that he wears and is very tough to crack.
Yeah, exactly. And I was going to ask that too, because you hadn't interviewed him in WWE when he did his 02 to 04 run, because he had left right after WrestleMania 20. And then he wanted back in 05, but then a lot of stuff happened, where he didn't end up going back until 2012. But if you would have interviewed him probably between 02 and 04, I think that would have been a lot different than probably, I'm going to say you interviewed him probably between 2008 and 2010 on the satellite, because that's when he was in the midst of his UFC career. So he was a lot different in 2008, 2010 than he would have been in 03 or 04. But he's somebody, though, that I hope one day can get a bit more public, because I think he's got a great story. And I think he's actually an inspiration too, because he's a guy that looks at wrestling and in a UFC, not just as a job, but he looks at it as some way to have a better life for himself. And I think that rubs a lot of the other guys the wrong way. Doesn't rub me the wrong way personally, but I think he's a guy too. Like, he just did the Pat McAfee show, which is the first interview he's done in years. And he let out a Brock that no one else knew. And I think that if you would have had the opportunity to interview the Brock Lesnar of today, you guys could have probably put on the best off the record ever done. I think it would have been extremely intriguing. So I had no idea that you actually did interview Brock in his UFC run. So that was intriguing to know, because I know that you did a few satellite interviews, but the off the record in-person ones, to me, they hit different, because there's a very genuine aura about them, of sitting across from somebody at that stature.
Agreed. Oh yeah.
And going like, hey, I get to shake your hand. I get to actually look into your eyes and say a question and you answer. It's incredible.
Way more powerful, way easier to some extent to create that connection, which is crucial. You have to have a connection to do a good interview, which doesn't mean that you have to be connected by him liking you or her liking you. It's not about that. It's not a connection of friendship necessarily. That is one way to do it. Friendship, but also animosity. If, like I said, if you're talking to a guy who genuinely, it's not a work, he genuinely dislikes me, that's a connection as well. So I think that would have been a great challenge, because there's so much we don't know about him.
Exactly. And another person that we didn't know a lot about until recently was Mark Calloway, also known as The Undertaker, who you got to interview at WrestleMania 18 Access in 2002 when he was in the midst of his American Badass gimmick. I have a couple questions. So one, what was it like interviewing him out of character? Because that was like one of the very few out of character interviews he ever did up until recently. And number two is, you told him that you knew when he needed to retire and you were going to tell him when he needed to retire. Did you do that?
I did not do that. I don't remember saying that, but that does sound like something that I would say. My impression of him was I had no idea what to expect. Right, so I'm sitting on our set, which we had set up at that fan event, and I'm waiting for him, and I'm thinking, like, what's this going to be like? Right, because I mean, it's not like I could watch other interviews with him and think, okay, well, he's pretty relaxed, or and he walks up to me, and as he's walking up to me, I'm thinking, okay, what's it going to be? What's he going to be like? And he kind of smiles and says something like, "Hey man, how you doing?" And I thought, this is going to be gold. You could tell right away that
very
he was
genuine, man. Yeah.
Yeah. I immediately liked him. I immediately thought that he had a kindness that he would never show in the ring, obviously, because of the characters he played. And I loved him. I thought he was super smart. I thought he was willing to play, so to speak, which means that he was willing to talk about things that maybe you would wonder, would he talk about those things? And it was also an interview that because of, and I've said this before, the reason why those wrestling interviews were so good largely was the research that I got from Jeff Merrick and Bob Makowitz. Yeah. And I had some gold with Mark. Yeah. Gold. And none of this was mine. Like, this was me, Jeff Merrick, saying, okay, you got to ask him one time backstage when Shawn Michaels came back to the dressing room. I think it was a house show.
Mania 14, yeah. Well, he didn't want to do the job for Austin.
Yes.
They told him, like, I'm going to put you in your place if you don't do it.
Yeah. So I said, is it true that you threatened him? I don't remember what he said, but it was like, well, yeah, I'm not saying it's not true. And that was gold.
He was awesome. I met him in 2019. He was at the Niagara Falls Comic-Con doing a show, and the lineup was insane for him that day. He had just done the match with Goldberg 2 days before, and he flew all the way from Saudi Arabia to Niagara within 2 days to come do the show. And he was tired, don't get me wrong, but he was still gracious to everybody. He was great to me. He shook my hand. He told me he was happy that I came. And there was this very soft aura about him, even though he looks like an absolute killer, with all the, like with all the tattoos, long black hair, goatee. But he was, along with Kurt Angle, the nicest guy I ever met. And he's another guy I looked up to. Him and Kurt Angle are my two favorites of all time. So now Taker's doing a lot more appearances and interviews. So I think it'd be awesome too to even connect with him again down the road, whether you or I connect with him or both. That would be fantastic, because he's now even more open than usual. And speaking of that too, another thing I wanted to ask is your interviews with Edge, another fellow Canadian. What was it like interacting with him? Was he a lot like how he is on TV, or did you think he was the exact opposite?
I didn't know what to think going in. I think he was on the show probably, I don't know, half dozen times maybe. And we got along great. It was like first of all, like the fellow Canadian thing is always a good card to play like right away.
Exactly.
But the last time that I saw him, he was on with wrestler from Calgary, Canadian guy. I think he's from Calgary. Yeah, Christian? He was on with Christian. That's it. Yeah. And Christian said something. And I said to him, "Oh, okay. Have you ever done steroids?" Right? He made reference to something, and he said, "No, I never have." And I just turned and said, "How about you, Adam?" And he said, yeah, I have. I tried it for a while. And then he talked a bit about it. And then he was so pissed off at me. He was so pissed off. I didn't hear it from him, but he called Carl DeMarco, who was the head of WWE Canada back in the day, and said, Landsberg betrayed me. He ambushed me. And it was like, I didn't feel guilty about that at all. Like I have done things that after I've done them, I thought, oh, that wasn't very good, or that was bad, or you shouldn't have done that, or that was a mistake. But it was just the natural part of the conversation. And if he didn't want to say, look, yeah, I've done steroids, then he didn't have to say it. And by the way, like who at that time would think no one can ask me about that? Everyone talked about steroids. That was the topic.
Exactly. And that was also, that interview, I believe, was in 2005, from what I remember. So that was 2 years before the wellness program really became a big thing in the company. Like you would still get punished back then, I know, if you did do steroids or if you did any PEDs, but after the Benoit stuff happened, and I won't get back into it, but after that happened, that's when they really cracked down on steroids, because there was steroids found in his autopsy as well. But I believe Edge was one of the guys too that they actually suspended. They did like a big suspension in 2007 after that, and I believe Edge was one of them. I don't know if it was for steroids or if it was for, I don't think Edge was on steroids back then, but I think it was for like Percocets or something. I can't remember. But after that, 2 years after that interview that you did with him, they really cracked down on the steroids and that. And since then, I don't think anyone's ever been suspended for it. So I guess that's good riddance. But yeah, I've never met Edge either, but since he's a fellow Canadian, I would love to. And he's back in the ring now, better than ever at 49 years old, or going on 49. So I'm happy he got to come back from that awful neck injury that he had in 2002. So, but leading up to guys too that that were controversial to say the least, he's now back in All Elite Wrestling. CM Punk. We already know what happened with the off the record interview where it didn't connect. But what are your thoughts now, looking back at it about 7 years later? Like, do you think that there would be room for you guys to ever collaborate about that? Or maybe, because I like my sense of it when he came on, and I've been a fan of his in-ring stuff forever, because I think he's great on the mic and he's great in the ring. But I think that day it was just recently after he left WWE. So I think he was so detached from really wanting to talk about wrestling. But he seemed like he was tired, seemed like he kind of just wanted to kind of go through the motions. What were your thoughts besides what happening about him in general? Like,
we could, next time I do your show, if you invite me back, like you're not going to invite me back. I would say that we could do the whole show on CM Punk and my experience with him. There's so many twists and turns. But, for me, I think that he's one of the best talkers that I've ever met. Right, he's a super bright guy. He has a very charming side to him.
Yeah.
I think that we interviewed him because he was jumping to UFC, right?
Yes.
And I think it was probably set up by UFC. And so he was not ready for where I wanted to go with the interview. Right. Yeah. And because I didn't want to talk to him, for a half hour about UFC or for however long it was.
Well, he hadn't fought yet at that point either.
Yeah. I mean, so the first question I asked him, if I remember correctly, was have you ever taken a real punch because you're going to UFC? And that made him so mad right away.
Yeah, I could tell.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So from that point on, it went downhill. He thought I betrayed him because beforehand, when we were just talking, again, it was a satellite interview. So we're just conversing. And I was being, as I am to everyone, nice to him, right? And then he said on the air, "Oh, you're my buddy beforehand, and now you're doing this. I got you. And it was I thought that was unfair in that when you ask someone a question like, have you taken a real punch? That's not a betrayal. That's not a I got you moment. That's a legitimate question. Like, tell me you didn't think about it. A guy goes from WWE, which we know you have to be hugely athletic and you do a million things, but you don't get punched. You don't, you're not put in a position where you got to tap out because otherwise your arm's going to break. So it's totally legit to ask that question. And that angered him right away. And it just kind of got worse from there. But I told you before that, an interview that has animosity in it can be really good too.
Yeah, it draws. And the other thing too, when you mentioned to him if he did take a real punch to the face, I know he has, but I think on his behalf, because he was so detached from wrestling at that point. He didn't want to talk about it anymore. But that was still the big thing because he had just walked out a few months, 11 months prior, I think. So everybody still wanted to talk about it. So you asked him if he did take a real punch to the face. And in wrestling, you probably know this, but if you get punched in the face for real in the ring, they call it stiffing. So if you punch somebody, even though it's not real and you still connect with them hard enough, it's known as a stiff shot, right? And I think he might have misinterpreted that for thinking maybe you were asking if somebody actually punched him for real in the ring and somebody shot on him and really decided to go after him. I think that might have been a misinterpretation on his behalf, because I know from my perspective in high school and grade school, I've gotten into my share of fights too, and I've been punched in the face for real. So when I'm in the ring, I'm pretty sure I know if I get stiff, it's going to be different than taking an actual real punch to the face. So my last question for you, and I wanted to end it on a cooler note, Rob Van Dam. You had spoken with Rob Van Dam in 2005. He's a bit more chill, I should say, for an interview, but what were your thoughts on him?
What were your thoughts about the interview? Because again, that's a long time ago for me.
I liked it. I think Rob tried to, I had met Rob and he was very nice to me too. So I think he tried to play it cool, but also too, that was in a time in 2005 where a lot of guys were still protecting their gimmicks. So I still feel like he was 80% in gimmick and you got 20% of the real Rob. Yeah. But it was good. I like the shirt, by the way. He had a blue tribal shirt on. It looked awesome.
I think that, if that's the case, that's partly a failure of the host. Even though sometimes people are impossible to crack, but it's your job to crack them. And if they're going to, if he came planning to offer up 0% of him and the rest would be his character or his work, then, and we got 20%, that would be a success. I don't know what he came intending, but I do know that it's in that case, my responsibility to get things out of him that maybe others haven't got. So I remember thinking, this is, I'm getting a lot of the wrestler, and we would never have put a wrestler on the show in character, right? We'd never have done that. Where I'm interviewing, a guy who's now, it's like he's playing the character that he played in a movie. Who would interview that person? And that's what everyone did. And that's what put us on the map, right? Was the fact that not only would we ask questions about the real person, but first and foremost, they agreed to come on and be that. And that put us on the map. And that gave us this great opportunity to to grab wrestling fans, whom I would say are the only portable audience that exists. And by portable, I mean, if you hear that, you know, The Undertaker, Mark Calloway, is going to be on Off the Record, you're going to watch if you're a wrestling fan. But there's nothing, but there's nothing else like that. If you say, oh, you know, we have Austin Matthews and Connor McDavid together, people would go, yeah, that sounds like it, you know, that might be interesting. And you would get a 20% bump in ratings. But, you know, with wrestlers, you could quadruple your ratings just because the wrestling fan would find you and watch you.
Exactly. And to conclude, I just want to say that interviewing wrestlers can be a major hit or a major miss, depending on who you get. Because you can, like you said, you can either get The Undertaker in full dead man gimmick where he says just rest in peace in the whole interview, or you can get Mark Calloway, who's also The Undertaker, but also a human being as well. So it's a very hit or miss situation. But I know you have calls to do for Sick Not Weak, and I know that you are helping promote mental health in the best way you possibly can. And I'm so happy that I can collaborate with you and the Sick Not Weak community. So gonna let you go for that since it's almost 11. And I want to say thank you for coming back on, and we will schedule a show with Punk and maybe some other guests that you had in the future.
That would be great. And by the way, just so you know, when you say I will let you go, hold on. I can go anytime I want.
Whenever the hell you want.
Yeah. So I don't need your position to hang, your opinion or permission to hang up. So it works out well because I got to go and you want to let me go. So until next time, see you on TikTok. People should follow Sick Not Weak on TikTok. It's more fun than I've had in a long time.
TikTok, doing videos. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook.
But TikTok is it just allows you the freedom to. I mean, we did one, you know, with there's one posted right now with Bret Hart, you know, where I was talking about how I remember I was at the beginning of my fall into depression when I first interviewed Bret, which was the first week of the show, and he put me in the sharpshooter. And I remember thinking, wow, you know, I wasn't great back then, like mental health wise, but I was still okay. And then I fell deeper and deeper and deeper. And my lesson that I try to teach others is I waited 6 months to go and get help at that point. And I gave up those 6 months of my life, which I'll never get back. All right. Time to go.
Yeah, Landsberg can go whenever the hell he wants, guys. I don't have no right. So I got to stop using figures of speech, but we're getting there. Hey, thanks for coming up.
Good job.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day.
Okay. See you, man.